everyone, I'm Joshua Orro, the Mustang Prince, and welcome to Mustang Prince Orro Reports. You know, with today being the spring equinox, it makes me want to think back to one of the most classic stories in the world of literature, The Secret Garden. Written in 1911 by Frances Hodgson Burnett, set in England during the turn of the 20th century, the story focuses on a young girl named Mary Lennox, who, after her parents are killed by a cholera epidemic, is relocated from India to Yorkshire to live with her uncle Archibald Craven in an isolated moorland house known as Misselthwaite Manor. During her stay, she discovers a hidden garden that her late aunt loved to spend hours in, and later meets her cousin Colin, who's been suffering from a spinal problem. But as both Mary and Colin spend time together in the garden, it helps Mary feel more at home, and it improves Colin's health. This book is considered as one of Burnett's most popular novels, as seen as a classic in English children's literature, and it would be adapted into several stage and film adaptations. However, when most folks think of The Secret Garden, they can mostly think of the 1993 live-action classic, which happens to be the film that introduced me to the book in the first place. And there was also the Hallmark adaptation from 1987, which also got a sequel. And last year, while I was on my vacation in Europe, I've heard news that a new film adaptation would be released this year. But little do people know or remember that in 1994, there was an animated adaptation, which happens to be the subject of my blog today. Released to television on November 5th, 1994, the movie is The Secret Garden. So, on for the plot of the movie. Like in the book, Mary Lennox is transferred to her uncle's old mysterious house in England after her parents' death. After making friends with a country boy named Dickon, along with a house cat named Darjeeling and a robin, she discovers many secrets on the grounds, including a locked-up, neglected garden and a locked-up, sickly boy who turns out to be her cousin. Far too much time is spent here on the children's attempts to save the sickly boy's life from the evil housekeeper and doctor who want to kill him and inherit the house. So, what do I think of this version? Well, I gotta say, it may not be as classical as the 1993 version, but I think it's worth checking out. But to further explain why, let's move on to Mustang notes. Now, there's not a lot of trivia for this movie, other than the fact that the film was animated by Deke, and it was produced by Mike Young Productions. Plus, it was part of an American television anthology series known as ABC Weekend Special, which aired on Saturday mornings on the ABC channel from 1977 to 1997. To me, this style of hand-drawn animation isn't too bad. In fact, I really like the look of Misselthwaite Manor, even though it can be a tad gloomy most of the time. And while the atmosphere outside is mostly overcast and stormy with really loud winds, I like the look of the garden. When Mary first goes inside, it looks really dead and messy due to it being locked up and deserted for years. But as she, along with Colin and Dickens, spend time together, the garden goes from dead to magical and beautiful. Also, while this movie does have a few songs in it, I want to talk about one, which happens to be the opening song, Home, sung by Mary Lennox. To me, this song is very emotional, and it does make you feel sympathy for Mary as she heads to her uncle's manor. Plus, it gets a heartwarming reprise at the end credits. Anyway, that's all I got for Mustang notes, so let's move on to the characters and their voice actors. The main character, Mary Lennox, is voiced by Andy McAfee. Best known as Robin Starling from the Tom and Jerry movie, Sarah from The Land Before Time 5 onwards, and Phoebe from Hey Arnold. At first, Mary seems like a spoiled brat, but as the film progresses, she becomes a loving, friendly, and a caring person. Plus, you just can't help but feel a little bit of sympathy after what she's gone through. Next is her cousin, Colin Craven, voiced by Richard Stewart. Before he and Mary met, Colin has been spending most of his life sick and shut in his room. Plus, for some time, he's been causing tantrums, which creates a spooky echo throughout the manor. Plus, I think Colin can be as spoiled as Mary. Also, when I first saw this version back in 2016, due to him being crippled, he kind of reminded me of me when I was recovering from a giant cell tumor during the time. But, on the other hand, I'm glad that Mary was able to help Colin feel better by spending time together and bringing the garden back to life. Next we come to Mary's uncle and Colin's father, Archibald Craven, voiced by Derek Jacobi, who played the king in the 2015 live-action Cinderella movie, and Nicodemus from The Secret of Nim. While Archibald is not necessarily a bad guy in the story, he has caused a lot of trouble in his time with his deep neglect for his son Colin. Plus, he doesn't get too many scenes. But, after meeting with Mary, he seems like a quiet and soft-hearted guy. But he's also very mysterious at the same time. And I'm glad that he was able to give Mary his late wife's garden. Next we have Dickon, voiced by Felix Bell. This country boy is one of my favorite characters in the story, due to the fact that he's friendly to the animals, and he's very skilled at playing the pipe. You know, a sort of flute-like thing. Also, I just love Felix Bell's English accent. Next is Robin, voiced by the legendary Frank Welker. Like in the book, Robin shows Mary where the key to the secret garden is. Plus, he's my second favorite character in the story. Also, I really like his song number where he teaches Mary to understand animal speech, and I like the bond that he shares with Dickon, and when Mary sends him to get her uncle for help. Another animal character to talk about is Darjeeling, voiced by the late Glennis Johns. Best known as Winifred Banks from Mary Poppins, and Miss Grimwood from Scooby-Doo and the Ghoul School. Darjeeling is a cat who lives with the maid Martha, who happens to be Dickon's sister, and she talks to Mary once she has learned to speak animal. She used to belong to Mary's late aunt Lillian, but she hasn't had an owner since Lillian's death. For this, Mary decides to own Darjeeling. She is strictly a house cat, and she suffers from a bit of paranoia of the outside of the manor, as well as Mrs. Medlock. But, thanks to some encouragement from Mary, she eventually gets herself outside to warn Robin when Mrs. Medlock plans to send Mary away. Finally, we have Mrs. Medlock, voiced by Honor Blackman. Mrs. Medlock plays out as the main antagonist for the movie. Now, to be honest, guys, Mrs. Medlock wasn't really a villain in the original book or in several other adaptations, but how they fit her into the movie as one is pretty well done, actually, due to her strictness. However, I really do not like Mrs. Medlock because of her abusive attitude, especially when she locks Mary away in her room, and later when she fires Martha for eavesdropping. After she's left in charge of Misselthwaite Manor, she makes it her goal to make sure that Mary is sent away to a boarding school and that Colin is poisoned so that the Cravens' inheritance will be hers. But at the end of the movie, having overheard Mrs. Medlock's plan to take over the manor, Archibald fires her and his brother, Dr. Craven, for their evil deeds. The rest of the cast includes Victor Spinetti, Joe Baker, and Naomi Bell. And now let's move on to my final words. Overall, the animated Secret Garden movie may not be as timeless as the book or its live-action counterparts, but it still has its own charm, and I think it may be worth watching, especially during the coronavirus epidemic. The story is very emotional, as well as thought-provoking, and it has a bit of a dark atmosphere at times. The animation by Deke is pretty good, with the scenery in the garden looking very magical, as well as Misselthwaite Manor looking mostly gloomy. Plus, the character designs aren't too bad either. And speaking of characters, the two main characters, Mary and Colin, do start out as spoiled brats, but they do improve as the film progresses. The supporting characters like Dickon, Robin, and Darjeeling are very enjoyable, including the maid Martha, and they do make me smile whenever they're on screen. As for Mrs. Medlock, well, what can I say other than the fact that she's a really nasty, power-hungry schemer. And of course, the voice cast is absolutely spectacular. Lastly, the musical numbers in the film can range from tear-jerking to heartwarming to fun. As for my final rating, I'll give it a 90% out of 100. Well, that's all for now. Be sure to join me again for my next blog. Mustang Power.